"Do not come closer." The voice cuts through the desert silence. Aaron watches his sons approach the golden box, their hands reaching toward the acacia wood overlaid with hammered gold. The air smells of incense and animal fat. Heat radiates from the sand beneath their feet. They do not know what waits inside the tent of meeting. They do not know that proximity without preparation means death. What did the Ark of the Covenant actually do in the daily life of ancient Israel? How was this golden box really used beyond the dramatic moments we see in movies? We imagine the Ark primarily as a weapon of supernatural power, glowing with mystical energy, striking down enemies in spectacular displays. But was this object designed for war, or was its true function far from military? The Ark traveled with Israel not just through battles, but through entire decades of ordinary encampments, Sabbath observations, festival celebrations, and mundane decisions. When priests carried this box, when families camped around the tent that housed it, what were they actually experiencing? For centuries, we have imagined the Ark as primarily a weapon, a divine artillery piece wheeled out for battles and then stored away. But the evidence reveals something profoundly different. The Ark was the throne of God's presence among his people, a liturgical center that structured daily worship, a legal repository that anchored covenant identity, and a teaching instrument that formed Israel's understanding of holiness through tangible encounter. You will discover the actual weight of the gold that covered it, the specific measurements that governed who could approach and when, the ritual calendar that determined its movement, and the family structure that organized around its care. You will feel the terror of unauthorized approach, hear the specific sounds of its transport, and understand how physical space around this object taught theological truth. Many details of the Gospels gain new and deeper meaning when we understand how Jesus reimagined the presence of God no longer confined to a golden box, but dwelling in human flesh. Stay until the end, because what you are about to discover goes beyond historical curiosity and can strengthen our faith today. But this golden box was not abstract symbolism. It was a physical object with precise dimensions and crushing weight. The Ark measured approximately 75 feet by 2, 25 feet by 2, 25 feet. Acacia wood formed the core structure, dense desert hardwood that resisted decay. Over this wood, craftsmen hammered sheets of pure gold covering every surface. The gold alone likely weighed between 200 and 300 pounds. Add the wood core, the solid gold mercy seat lid, and the 2 hammered cherubim, and the total weight reached between 400 and 500 pounds. This was not something one person could lift. The poles used to carry it had to be substantial enough to bear this load without bending. The carrying system was not optional convenience, but sacred requirement. 4 gold rings permanently affixed to the 4 corners held the poles. These poles were never to be removed, even when the Ark rested. When Levites carried the Ark, 2 men bore each pole on their shoulders, walking in careful synchronization. The physical sensation was unmistakable. The gold warmed under the desert sun, the weight pressed down on shoulder muscles, sweat soaked through garments, and every step required coordination to prevent tilting. For wealthy Israelites who contributed gold, this object represented sacrificial generosity transformed into perpetual reminder. But for poor families, the Ark's presence meant something different. They would never touch it, never see it uncovered, never enter the tent where it rested. The Ark created a geography of access. The high priest once annually, ordinary priests for specific duties, Levites for transport, and the people at prescribed distances. This was not choice, but survival. Uzzah's death when he reached out to steady the Ark taught every generation that proximity without authorization meant immediate judgment. Jesus grew up hearing these stories, learning that the God of Israel was both intimately present and terrifyingly holy. He observed the annual Day of Atonement when the high priest entered behind the veil. These experiences were not abstract theological concepts. They were lessons learned in the body. Watching his community organize their entire physical existence around a golden box that embodied the paradox of divine presence. Later, when Jesus spoke about himself as the place where heaven and earth meet, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing the reality that the ark had prefigured. God's presence no longer mediated through gold and rituals, but through flesh and blood. When the ark was not traveling, it sat in the Holy of Holies with specific liturgical functions that structured worship. The mercy seat atop the ark was the place where blood was sprinkled on Yom Kippur. The high priest entered this inner chamber once per year, carrying burning incense and sacrificial blood. The smoke filled the space, obscuring direct view of the mercy seat. He sprinkled blood 7 times on the mercy seat and 7 times on the ground before it, atoning for Israel's collective sins. This ritual maintained Israel's covenant relationship with God. The ark functioned as the geographical center of this atoning system. Inside it rested 3 objects: the 2 stone tablets with the 10 commandments, a golden jar containing manna, and Aaron's rod that had budded. These items represented law, provision, and mediation, the 3 pillars of covenant relationship. The wealthy priesthood managed access to the ark and profited from the sacrificial system. But for poor Israelites, participation came at real cost. Bringing a lamb for sacrifice represented significant economic burden. The ark's presence created a religious economy, where those who could afford larger offerings received more visible participation, while the poor remained at outer courts. Yet the ark also democratized access to divine justice. The tablets inside contained laws that applied equally to rich and poor. When disputes arose, decisions were rendered based on Torah kept inside the ark. This was not arbitrary judgment by elites, but covenant law accessible to all. The ark anchored Israelite identity in written revelation, rather than the whims of rulers, a revolutionary concept in the ancient Near East. Jesus learned that the law stored in the ark was meant to bring life, not burden. He grew up in a community that had lost the physical ark but maintained its traditions. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body, observing how religious systems could either liberate or oppress. Later, when Jesus declared he came to fulfill the law, not abolish it, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing how every commandment stored in that ancient box found its completion in his life and teaching. Beyond liturgy, the ark structured Israel's experience of sacred time and migration. When the camp prepared to move, a specific sequence unfolded. Priests disassembled the tabernacle while Levites waited. The high priest then covered the ark with the veil, then leather, then a cloth of solid blue. Only after this triple covering could Levites approach to carry it. The blue cloth during transport signaled to all Israel that God's presence was moving. Children grew up recognizing this cloth, understanding that when it rose, their family would follow. The ark always moved at the front, with Moses declaring, "Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered." The pace of travel was dictated by the ark's bearers. 4 men carrying 500 pounds could not move quickly across desert terrain. The entire nation adjusted their rhythm to match this sacred object. When the ark rested, they rested. This created a peculiar temporal experience, time measured by the movement of God's presence. The slowness was the point. Israel learned patience and dependence through years of matching their pace to sacred transport. For wealthy families, following the ark was manageable. But for poor families with elderly members and small children, the constant movement was grueling. The ark's rhythm showed no favoritism. Everyone followed at the same pace, endured the same heat, lived with the same uncertainty. Jesus grew up with these stories of sacred migration. He understood that God's presence had once determined Israel's entire existence. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body through generational memory. Later, when Jesus told disciples to take up their cross and follow him daily, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing the same pattern, life structured by following divine presence wherever it leads, at whatever pace it requires. The ark's deepest function was forming Israel's understanding of holiness through spatial pedagogy. The tabernacle created concentric zones of increasing holiness: the outer court, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies, where the ark rested. This spatial arrangement incarnated theology. Holiness was reality you could measure in cubits. reality that killed if you transgressed boundaries unprepared. Children grew up absorbing this geography of the sacred. They learned that some spaces required preparation, and the innermost space welcomed only one person on one day per year. The Ark anchored this system of graduated access. The two cherubim on the mercy seat represented the throne of the invisible God. The space between their wings was the most dangerous in Israel, where divine presence concentrated so intensely that improper approach meant instant death. Yet this dangerous holiness was also Israel's protection. When Philistines captured the Ark, they quickly learned that possessing it without covenant relationship brought plagues and panic. They returned it after 7 months, but when Israel honored the Ark properly, its presence guaranteed victory and provision. Nothing seemed ordinary about this box, yet something essential was being built, a people who understood that approaching God required both invitation and preparation, both grace and reverence. The wealthy could afford offerings for maintaining ritual purity. The poor struggled to meet minimum requirements. Yet the Ark challenged this inequality by demonstrating that holiness could not be purchased. Nadab and Abihu died when they offered unauthorized incense, proving family status meant nothing. Uzzah died for touching what should never be touched. Jesus grew up understanding that his ancestors had lived with a holy object so dangerous that approaching it incorrectly meant death. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body. Later, when Jesus promised that whoever comes to him would never be cast out, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing access to God's presence no longer through blood-sprinkled gold, but through his own shed blood. To conclude, reflect on what we have discovered. When we observe the Ark in its historical reality, we realize it functioned far beyond the weapon depicted in popular imagination. It was the physical throne that structured daily worship, the legal repository that anchored covenant identity, the temporal center that taught patience, and the spatial teacher that formed Israel's understanding of holiness. The Ark's true use was forming a people who could live in proximity to consuming holiness while maintaining covenant relationship. Jesus knew the crushing weight of gold carried across desert sands, the terror of approaching holiness unprepared, the annual drama of blood sprinkled in the inner chamber. And it was on this common ground that God's ultimate revelation was prepared. The Ark taught Israel to long for God's presence while fearing the consequences of careless approach. Jesus resolved this tension by becoming the place where perfect holiness and fallen humanity meet without consuming fire. God acts in the invisible, in the simple, in what seems routine. For 40 years, Israel learned holiness by following a golden box through wilderness, adjusting their entire existence to match its rhythms. Today, we learn holiness by following Jesus, who makes the dangerous access once mediated by the Ark available freely to all who believe. This calls us to reflection on how we approach God's presence now, whether we have lost the reverence that kept Israel alive, or whether we have gained the confidence that Jesus purchased through his blood. And if this documentary strengthened your faith and expanded your understanding of how God prepared his people for Christ through physical objects and spatial lessons, leave your like, comment on what you found most interesting, and share this video. Your support helps carry this story forward. Until the next video.